In November 2017, a battered wooden panel that half the experts in the room weren't sure was genuine went up for sale in New York. About 20 minutes later, the gavel came down at $450 million, and it is still the most anyone has ever paid for a single work of art at auction. The painter, dead 5 centuries, got nothing. The seller took most of it. The company standing at the front of the room, the one that did nothing but talk for those 20 minutes, walked away with tens of millions in fees on a painting it never owned for a single second. It had even arranged, before the sale opened, for an outside backer to promise roughly $100 million so that if the bidding died, someone else was on the hook. Almost no risk, and a fortune collected. An auction house looks like a store for the very rich. It owns almost nothing it sells, and works like a toll booth with 2 lanes. On one side, it bolts a buyer's premium on top of the winning bid, a fee the buyer pays over and above the hammer price. On the other, it carves a seller's commission out from underneath, a cut taken from what the seller walks away with. 2 fees on one object, and a company that never had to buy it, which means the numbers you read in the press usually measure the wrong thing. When a headline says a house sold $6 billion in a year, that $6 billion is the value of goods that changed hands, hammer prices plus fees. What the house actually kept is a thin slice on top. In a strong year, only about 13 cents of every dollar that crossed the block. That gap between sales and revenue is the key to everything downstream, including the part where the most famous auctioneer on earth loses money. The buyer's premium is the cleanest money in the building. It works like a sales tax the house sets for itself, a posted rate that is the same for a first-time bidder and a billionaire, and in practice, non-negotiable. At Sothebys in the US, as of February 2026, it runs 28% on the first $2 million of the hammer, 22% from $2 to $8 million, and 15% above that, excluding categories like wine. The direction matters. The rate falls as the price climbs, which means the house earns its fattest blended margin on the cheap lots and thins it on the trophies. Christies in New York runs a similar ladder, 26% on the first million and something in the mid-teens up in the highest brackets, though the top tiers move around. And these rates move. Sothebys changed its premium 3 separate times between 2024 and 2026. The premium is also a recent invention. Both houses introduced the buyer's premium at 10% in London in 1975, and have nudged it upward more or less ever since. Put a real lot through it. A painting hammers at $10 million at Christie's rates, 26% on the first million, around 20 on the next several, the mid-teens on the rest, and the premium lands somewhere between $1.8 and $1.9 million, an 18 to 19% blended take on a painting the house never carried on its own books and never risked a cent to acquire. That is the visible machine. The more interesting money is offstage. A large share of what these houses move never goes under a gavel at all. In 2024, Christie's did $1.5 billion in private sales, quiet deals brokered directly between a seller and a buyer, up 41% in a year. Sothebys did $1.4 billion, up 17%. When the public market gets nervous, sellers who fear a flop in the room sell privately instead, and the house still clips its commission on the way through. There is also a bank hiding inside the auction house. Sothebys Financial Services lends money against art, taking a masterpiece as collateral the way a mortgage lender takes a house. By early 2026, that loan book stood around $1.75 billion, with more than $12 billion lent over its history, earning interest on paintings that aren't even for sale. In April 2024, Sothebys went further and packaged those art loans into a bond, about $700 million of them, the senior slice rated AAA, and sold it to investors. It followed with a larger deal, worth around $900 million in early 2026, this time folding in loans against collectible cars. One part of the room gets described wrong constantly. Early in a sale, you may hear the auctioneer take bids that don't seem to come from anyone, calling numbers off the wall. Those are chandelier bids, and they are disclosed and legal, with one hard limit. They can only run below the reserve, the confidential minimum the seller has agreed to accept. Their only job is to hide where that floor sits, so the seller's hand isn't tipped early. The moment the reserve is reached, every further bid has to be real. The number a genuine buyer finally pays is built entirely from real competition. That distinction separates how the room actually works from the version most people assume. So what would it cost you to own one? There are 3 very different doors, and only 2 of them are open. The cheap one is genuinely cheap. Auctioneer school runs around $2,000 in tuition. A state surety bond, the guarantee that pays your clients if you fail, runs anywhere from $2,000 to $50,000 depending on the state. You can hang a shingle on a modest general auction business for something like $2,500 to $7,500 all in. That is a real business, though nothing like the one you pictured. The middle door is a specialist house, and it is the realistic ceiling for a buyer with means. Heritage Auctions in Dallas, the largest house founded in the United States, sells coins, comics, sports cards, and other collectibles, and is estimated to do around $250 million in revenue with several hundred staff. Those are outside estimates for a private company, so treat them as approximate. Even so, that is roughly the top of what money can actually buy you into, because the famous door is bolted shut. You cannot buy Christies. Francois Pinault's holding company has owned it privately since 1998. You cannot buy Sothebys. Patrick Drahi took it private in 2019 in a deal worth about $3.7 billion, ending 31 years as a public company, and in 2024, he took on an outside minority investor. Two of the most valuable names in the business sit with a family, a financier, and a sovereign fund, and not one share is for sale. Even if it were, the building alone would stop you. Sothebys spent around $100 million buying the old Marcel Breuer Museum on Madison Avenue, and opened it as its global headquarters in November 2025. What you'd be buying isn't a shopfront, it's a museum you also have to run. Once you are in, the bill never stops, and it barely flexes. This is a business of people and buildings. The last year Sothebys filed clean public accounts as a standalone company, 2008, it spent about $617 million to run itself, $240 million of that on salaries alone. At the end of 2024, it still employed more than 2,000 people, and shedding them is expensive in its own right. Severance alone cost about $29 million that year. There is now a cost on top that didn't exist in 2008. Under private ownership, the house carries heavy debt, and debt service has become arguably its single largest fixed line. Sotheby's borrowed through an $825 million bond priced at around 8.5%, the kind of yield lenders demand from a riskier borrower, and in June 2024, S&P cut its credit rating deeper into that territory. None of it shrinks when the art market cools. Not the payroll, and not the interest on that bond. Sales do, and violently. Sticky costs against wildly cyclical revenue, that mismatch is the whole risk of the business. There is one more instrument, the one that makes the fortunes and destroys the owners. A house that supposedly takes no risk has a single weapon it uses to win the best consignments away from its rival, the guarantee. To land a prized collection, the house promises the seller a minimum price, no matter what happens in the room. If the bidding falls short, the house itself buys the work. That is the one moment the whole "we never own inventory" story breaks, and the agent quietly becomes a principal, holding a very expensive painting. To take that risk back off its books, the house usually pre-arranges an outside backer, an irrevocable bidder who commits in writing before the sale to buy at the guarantee level, and who typically takes 15 to 20% of any upside above it in return. Guarantees now cover most of the top of the market. In the first half of 2025, by one industry count, around 73% of post-war and contemporary evening sale lots by value carried them. This is deliberate market design, out in the open, but it inverts the entire model, because the moment you guarantee a lot, you own its downside. The history of that inversion has a graveyard. When Bernard Arnault, the financier who built LVMH, bought the auction house Phillips in 1999 and set out to challenge the duopoly, he did it by hurling guarantees at sellers to pull consignments in. One collection he guaranteed made only around $85 million, against a house guarantee reported near $170. By 2002, Phillips had run up something like $400 million in losses, and Arnault, one of the sharpest operators in luxury, pulled back and sold down his stake. The mechanism did not care how brilliant the owner was. It has caught insiders too. In 2015, Sotheby's fought Christies for the estate of its own former chairman, guaranteed $515 million, the largest guarantee in auction history, charged the seller no commission, and handed the entire buyer's premium back until that figure cleared. The sale booked a roughly $12 million loss in a single quarter. And in 2007, at the peak of the last boom, Sothebys wrote $902 million of guarantees. When the market broke the following year, the houses were left holding tens of millions of dollars of art they were contractually forced to buy. And Sothebys lost about $52 million across the autumn 2008 season alone. The biggest auction in human history was staged by Christies in November 2022, when the collection of Microsoft's Paul Allen sold over 2 nights for about $1.62 billion, with 5 separate works topping $100 million each. A year earlier, Sotheby's had sold the Macklowe collection, assembled by a divorcing couple and ordered to market by a court, for $922 million on a guarantee that time, paid off. Records like these are the sport of the business, but a trophy sale is, at heart, a marketing event. Once the seller's commission is waived, the buyer's premium partly handed back, and the backer given a slice of any upside, the house's net margin on a top lot can fall to around 2% before anything goes wrong. Sotheby's' own Mari Claudia Jimenez has put it about that low. The money was never really in the masterpiece. It sits in the mid-market lots, and in the private deals and the loan book that never make a headline. So what does the whole house look like priced out? In a good year, the fee engine looks unstoppable. Stack a blockbuster like the Allen sale on top of $1.5 billion in private deals per house, add interest on that near $2 billion loan book, and you have several income streams with almost no capital tied up in goods. On paper, a perfect business. Then the market softens, and the same fixed base is still sitting there. Sotheby's' real numbers only became visible because it carries public debt, and its bondholders were shown the figures, reported in September 2025. In 2023, a near-record year, Sotheby's did $7.9 billion in sales and $994 million in revenue, and still posted a $106 million pre-tax loss. In 2024, sales fell 23% to $6 billion, revenue fell 18% to $813 million, and the loss more than doubled to $248 million. An 18% dip in revenue, producing a jump in losses of more than 100%, is the sound of operating leverage meeting concentration. The sales that vanished were disproportionately the trophies. The number of works selling above $10 million fell 39% across the market in 2024. Guarantee write-downs bit, and the fixed base did not move, the thousands still on payroll, the bond interest still compounding at 8.5%. That is how a company can pass $6 billion of the world's most coveted objects across the block and lose $250 million doing it. At this scale, a 13-cent take rate simply cannot cover the salaries, the buildings, the debt, and the sweeteners it takes to win the best consignments, so even the good year loses money. And there is a second turn underneath that one. The elegance of clipping both sides while owning nothing quietly reverses in a downturn. Once you have handed sellers guarantees to keep the masterpieces flowing in the boom, you are the one holding the paintings when the room goes quiet. The mechanics on the block are identical from one year to the next. The guarantees and debt stacked behind them are what turn a fee business into a holding one when demand falls away. You don't buy an auction house to bank a profit each December. You buy it because it is the toll booth that every great painting on earth eventually has to pass through. And a toll booth is worth more than any single toll it collects, worth owning for the position itself. Go back to that room in 2017. The panel on the easel, the phones lit up along the wall, 20 minutes and $450 million. You can read the whole machine now, the small symbols in the catalog marking which lots are guaranteed. The auctioneer taking bids off the wall, climbing toward a floor no one in the room is allowed to see, the premium stacking quietly on top of the hammer, and the calm person holding the gavel, running a brokerage, a lender, and a bond issuer at the same time, on masterpieces that belong to someone else.